So the last thing we need to make with these moccasins is this top piece right here. And this is worked in a long strip with these points at the top and this curved part at the bottom, and then we're going to fold this over and tack it down. So this is all actually just one piece on the top. And this would be a great section to follow along with a written pattern, because there's a few details here that you're going to just probably want to pause the video each row so that you can catch up. And if it helps you to look at the written pattern, you can find it in the description box below or on makeanddocrew.com. If you search flip-flops, you'll find it there too. To get started with the top part, we're going to chain 19. So I have 19 chains here, and I'm going to work into the second chain from the hook with a single crochet, and then I'm just going to single crochet all the way across. So this is going to be row 2. So now we've made it to the end of row 2, and I'm going to flip my work around, chain 1, and then this is row 3. We're going to skip the very first stitch. So here's the chain, here's the first stitch, and I'm going to work a single crochet into the second stitch. So that's actually the third stitch from the hook, because we're skipping the chain and the first stitch. And then I'm going to single crochet across, and in the very last stitch of this row I'm going to put 2 single crochets. So we're decreasing on one end and increasing on the other end. So I'm going to turn my work and chain 1, and row 4 is going to be putting 2 single crochets in the first stitch. So I'm going to skip the chain and put 2 single crochets right here, and then I'm going to continue in single crochet, just 1 single crochet per stitch. As we get to the end of this row, you can see this last stitch right here was the one where we skipped a stitch at the beginning of the last row. So I'm just going to work into that with a single crochet, and that's the end of row 4. So I'm going to flip this around. I chained 1. I'm going to skip the first single crochet and work into the second one. So that's the third stitch from the hook. And then I'll be putting 2 single crochets in the last stitch of this row. And for row 6, we're going to repeat row 4. So we chain 1, and then we put 2 single crochets in the first stitch and work the rest of the row in single crochet. For row 7, we're going to repeat what we did in row 3. So I'm going to chain 1, skip the first stitch, work a single crochet into the third stitch from the hook, our second single crochet, and then I'm going to single crochet across and end the row with 2 single crochet in the last stitch. We're going to start row 8, which will be the same as what we did in row 4. So we're going to turn, chain 1, and 2 single crochets in the first stitch. Row 9, we're going to repeat the same thing that we did with row 3, where we're going to skip the chain, skip the first single crochet, work into the second single crochet, but instead of putting 2 single crochets in the last stitch, we're just going to do 1. So essentially we're skipping that first single crochet and then we're just single crocheting across. Row 10, we're going to just chain at the beginning of the row and then work in single crochet all the way across. No increases or decreases. This is going to be the front part of the toe that's a little flatter and less pointy. And for row 11, we're going to do a similar thing to what we did in row 3, where we chain 1, we skip the first single crochet, so we're working into this third stitch from the hook, and then we're just going to single crochet all the way across again, no increases at the end. For row 12, we're going to chain 1 and then single crochet in each stitch across the entire row. Okay, that's the end of row 12, and we've made it exactly halfway through this tongue top moccasin section. So this is going to fold down like this and make this top part. And if you know that your foot is a little bit wider, this would be a good spot to just add 2 more rows of single crochet. So just go down and back, and that'll make this just a little bit wider to accommodate a wider foot. I would say that as this is without extra rows, this would fit a pretty average size foot. And this tends to be a little bit stretchy, so there's definitely some play in how it fits most feet. So if you don't want to do any extra rows, we're just going to proceed with row 13, where we're going to start making the point come back this way for the other side of the foot. So if you've added any extra rows in the middle to make your piece wider for a wider foot, know that your row count might be a little bit different than mine, but either way, you're going to finish the last several rows in the same way that I am and I'm about to outline here. So for me, this is row 13, and I'm going to chain 1 as I turn. Here's the beginning of 13. I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to put 2 single crochets in the first stitch. So we're going to increase right there, 2 single crochets in the first one, and then I'm going to single crochet all the way across. Now I'm going to turn it as I chain. So this is going to be row 14, and we're going to skip the first single crochet. So just like we did before, that's my chain. I'm going to skip the first single crochet and then begin with single crocheting into the 3rd stitch from the hook. So this is going to make the piece start to curve upward, just like it did on the other side. And we're going to single crochet all the way across and then put 2 single crochet stitches in the last stitch of this row. There's 2 single crochets in the last stitch, so we've increased right here, and that's going to make this point come upward. So we're going to turn this and chain 1 to begin row 15, and in row 15 we're going to simply single crochet all the way to the end, and then we're going to do a decrease at the end of the row. So I'm just single crocheting in each stitch until I reach the last 2 stitches of this row. And now that I'm at the last couple of stitches, we're actually going to skip the second to last single crochet. So that's that one, and then we're just going to do a single crochet in this stitch. So just like we were doing that before to do decreases to create the curve, or to create this edge, we're doing that right here by skipping this, single crocheting in this last stitch, and now we've decreased 1. So I'm going to turn and chain 1 to begin row 16, and row 16 is going to be the same thing that we did in 14. We chained 1, we're going to skip the first stitch, so there's the chain, there's the first stitch, we're going to single crochet into the 3rd stitch from the hook, and then we're going to single crochet all the way across and put an increase at the very last stitch. So that's going to be 2 single crochets in the last stitch of the row. I'm going to turn and chain 1, and row 17 is going to be a repeat of row 15. So we're going to start with a chain 1 and just single crochet all the way across until we get to the last 2 stitches. Here we are at the last 2 stitches. I'm going to skip the second to last one and single crochet into the last stitch like that, and chain 1 as I turn to begin row 18. And row 18 is a repeat of 14 again, so we're going to skip the first single crochet and single crochet into the 3rd stitch from the hook, and then we're going to single crochet across and put 2 single crochet stitches in the last stitch of this row. We're on row 19 now, so I'm going to chain one as I turn, and row 19 is going to be single crocheting across and then doing a decrease at the end of the row where we skip the second to last stitch and then single crochet in the last stitch of the row. So as you can see, we're alternating the same 2 rows just like we did at the first half of this. We're working them slightly differently now because we're reversing them. So I'm at the last 2 stitches. I'm going to skip the second to last one, work in the last one, and then chain one as I turn. And for row 20, we're going to repeat row 14, which is a chain one, skip the first stitch, work into the 3rd stitch from the hook, and then single crochet all the way across, putting 2 single crochet stitches in the last stitch of this row. All right, this is our last row, and it's going to be a repeat of row 15. We're on row 21 now. So we're going to turn the work, chain one, and then single crochet all the way across, doing the decrease at the end of this row by skipping the second to last stitch. It can be helpful to put a marker in this last stitch that you just worked, just so that you know when you make it back here that you just know which is your last stitch. And then I'm going to just work my way around this in single crochet, just sort of finding holes where they're available, trying to keep the frequency of stitches about similar to what it would be if I was actually working into regular rows of single crochet. So I don't want them too far apart, but I also don't need to put them so close together that things get bunched up. So I'm just kind of creating a smooth edge right here. You can kind of pull at it every once in a while just to make sure that things are looking basically smooth. So now we're at the point where we originally created the chain to start this piece. That's where our first row was. And because of the way that I worked into the chain, my loops are kind of big on this side. So I'm going to actually work my single crochets into this hole, which is kind of where the first row of actual single crochet is, and that's just so that this part doesn't get so stretched out and make big gaps in the toe section. So I'm just going to work right there. You can kind of make a game time decision about how yours looks, and people tend to crochet into different parts of the chain when they're first starting a row, so yours might not even look like this, in which case you could just work into the regular chain loop. So now we finished up this edge with single crochet. We started here and worked in single crochet all the way around, and now at this point, to help us get around this curve properly, we're going to put a second single crochet in this last stitch. So I'm just going to work around, this is the tail from my original chain. I'm just going to put a second single crochet right here, and then for these inner parts of the sort of ears, I'm going to slip stitch along this edge. So just like we did down here, I'm just going to find an opportunity to put a stitch sort of as frequently as I would think they would be if this was just a regular row of single crochet. And particularly here, we just want to make sure that the stitches are loose enough that it's not causing the section to pucker or curve in, because then the top of your moccasin, the little flaps won't look quite as flat. So you can see the single crochet is just helping clean up that edge. You can't see the increases quite as clearly then because we're sort of masking them with this row of slip stitch. And this side of the top that is facing me is actually going to be the part that is touching your foot in the moccasin, because we are going to fold these flaps over, and then they're going to be visible. The side we're working on of those is going to be visible at the top of your shoe. So now that we've made it up here to this other corner, we're going to work 2 single crochets in the corner just like we did on the other side. That just helps create enough distance to work all the way around this point. And from here, we're going to single crochet. We were slip stitching here. We're going to single crochet all the way down and stop in the last stitch that's marked. That will be our last stitch, because if you remember, the stitch right after the marked stitch was our first stitch of this round. So I'm going to just continue in single crochet and then fasten my yarn off. So I'm pulling that through to finish it off, and this would be a good point to block this piece a little bit. As you can see, it's just a little bit curly, and a quick blocking of it, especially since this is cotton yarn, will really help flatten it out. So I'm going to weave in these ends and then put it on my blocking board. And my blocking board is simply a knee gardening board that I got at Dollar Tree. And I'm going to put my skewers in here like this to flatten it out, and then spritz it with a spray bottle and let it dry. Okay, once your piece is finished blocking, we are going to be able to sew it to the top of the moccasin.